I'm Kruser, and this is Building Basics with Gurreck Clan. In today's video, I'm going to take a shoulder bell and show you the process that I use to paint and weather a piece of a kit. Enjoy. I always prepare my projects by sanding them lightly with a 180 to 220 grit sandpaper, and that really just prepares the surface for the first layer, which is always going to be, for me, a self-etching primer. I prefer Rust-Oleum self-etching primer. You can find this at any big box store or home center. And if you can't find it there, it's going to be in the automotive aisle. If it's not in the paint section, check the automotive aisle of Walmart or whatever big box store you prefer. But Rust-Oleum self-etching primer, to me, I've had the best success with over the years and not having any kind of adverse reaction with paint sticking to plastics. So that's my first tip. Rust-Oleum self-etching primer always is my first coat. But I'm going to prepare the surface with 180 grit sandpaper wrapped around a sanding sponge, just to get the entire surface. Now once it's thoroughly sanded, I do both sides, front and back, because when I'm all done, I always paint the inside of the armor as well. But once it's all done sanded, be sure to wipe it down with I use a blue shop towel, paper cloth, and get all of the dust and debris off of it so that you can make sure that your primer sticks to the piece itself and not the debris that's on the outside of it. It's at this point where I start planning out what the damage is going to look like. I add my physical damage before I add my primer. If it's going to be a deep groove, like a blaster bolt or something to that effect, if the armor took a direct hit with something. Your armor should always be able to kind of tell a story. At least that's how I've always looked at mine. Or when I do a project, I'll look at the weathering and try to tell a story with the weathering. And in the end, it's almost as if less is more, because the last thing you want to do is start putting random spots everywhere that aren't in realistic places. So think of, where would there be weathering? It'd probably be worn more on the edges as opposed to the middle, based on contact or where the rub points would be, or if there is one significant piece of damage, that's going to be kind of a single focal point to that piece of the armor. We tend to get carried away with damage because we want to make it look like we went through hell and back, but it's not always necessary to overdo it, because overdoing it 9 times out of 10 comes off as not looking genuine. So we're going to attempt to put in one significant chunk of battle damage on here, and then edge weathering around a couple of the perimeters, and then maybe one series of scratches to just kind of tell a story with this one shoulder bell. Next, we're going to bust out the Dremel, and we're going to actually make that blaster bolt indentation. All right, so one of my favorite bits to use on my Dremel, and my Dremel's down here. I have the Dremel 3000 with the wand attachment, is this polishing stone. It's a tapered polishing stone, and you can get in and kind of make a pretty neat divot with some ridges to it. So if you think of how Boba's helmet dent is, it's not just a concave circle. It's got some edges to it. So this bit's kind of good for doing that, and it's just one of the things I do. I don't have a great way to showcase this here, but I'm going to put a dent right here in the leading edge, kind of off-centered, a little bit low on it, and we'll see if we can get this captured on camera here. See if this works. Safety first. All right, So it's nothing too big, but you can see it's got a little bit of definition in there. You can catch a couple of the ridges. And when that's painted, those high spots will hit just right and give it a little bit of definition. All right, so next up, we're just gonna put a little crack in there. And this is just a light surface cut with an X-Acto knife. I'm gonna hit it with just a touch of heat. When I grab my heat gun and touch it up just a little bit, it'll open it up ever so slightly to give it a little bit more depth. And then we'll go on to our next step, which will be primer. Before we get to the primer step, one thing that I think is really important is to heat your cans. Heat them in tap water. I'll take and turn the tap to as hot as I can, put a little pan of water, and then let the paint sit in it, or the primer, or whatever you're using, for a few minutes to bring it up to temperature. You don't want to exceed the temperature. It says you shouldn't exceed it on the warning label on the can, but you definitely want to warm it up to the point where it will atomize a little bit better and be a finer mist. And whenever you do paint or primer or whatever the case may be, it's painting about 8 to 12 inches away from the project in light coats. If you overdo it, it's just going to be a big caked on gooby mess, and you don't want to deal with that. So light coats of primer, light coats of paint, everything in moderation. It's better to have 3 or 4 light coats than one heavy one. So because we're up here in the Pacific Northwest, where one day it can be 87 degrees and the next day it can be 50 and raining, unfortunately today is a day where it's 50 and raining. So we're painting indoors. Make sure that you have proper ventilation, a mask, a respirator. Just take care of your lungs. You only get one set, and when paint gets in there, it doesn't really come out. So this is the first layer of primer that's on there. It's extremely light, as you can see. It may not even got full coverage. And it's a light dusting all over the piece. And we're going to do a few layers of this. The nice thing about this primer is it dries to the touch in about 15 minutes. So we're going to give it another 5 or so, and then hit it with another light layer. All right, so we're back. This is time to fully cure both sides. This is 3 light coats of primer. And what we're going to do next is just hit it with 1000 grit sandpaper, just to knock off any imperfections, any slight rough spots where maybe the primer had spattered a little bit because I didn't have it warm enough to get that fine mist that warm primer will give you. So we're going to sand it just lightly and then show you what that looks like. All right, and just, a couple minutes worth of sanding, and it's knocked down any high spots, any rough spots that were left over there. And it almost looks a little bit shiny now, but that's just because it's a little bit more smooth. We're going to hit it with a Krylon Brilliant Aluminum instead of a chrome. I'm not a big fan of chrome paint. I just don't like the way it reacts. I don't like how it tends to almost have like a dusty feel to it. So I use Brilliant Aluminum as a base layer. I've seen some folks use Brilliant Copper, but I'm going to be using Brilliant Aluminum. I've had good success with it, and we'll hit it with a couple of light coats of that. Okay, so the paint's adequately warm now. This is that Krylon Brilliant Aluminum that I use as a base. Now, typically once I start painting, I will not change paint brands once the first layer of paint has gone down. But Kruser, you used Rust-Oleum as primer. You're right, I did. That self-etching primer is a Rust-Oleum product, but once it fully cures, I've never had an issue with it going to paint of a different brand. I have had many issues where I've gone from a Krylon paint to a Duplicolor, or even to back to a Rust-Oleum paint, and there was an adverse chemical reaction. I've been told that it's because there are different curing agents depending on the brand of paint you use that can act badly with each other or react badly with each other, causing a whole myriad of issues. So I've just always stuck with one brand once I've got to the color section of my painting schemes. So here we go. We're going to go with this, like I said, about 8 to 12 inches away from the project. And I'll try to do this while looking through the camera. And I do it in fluid motions. I'll start my paint, make sure that it's actually paint and not just the propellant coming out. And I'll start my paint on this side, and in a smooth motion, I'll go all the way through the piece and then back. And we will let that sit. And that's really all it takes. And you can almost kind of see in the video that with that paint being warm, it just comes out nice and smooth. And that brilliant aluminum, in my opinion, just covers much better than chrome does without all of the bad side effects. All right, so we're back, and you're going to notice, hey, there's already some more weathering on there. That was a page out of Bob Ross's playbook. We had a happy accident. I was done and ready to move the piece over to my workbench and apply the liquid latex. And I dropped the armor, and it hit something that had some knurling on it and left a little damage there. So cleaned up the dirt that was on there and the debris as best I could and kind of left it, and we'll work with it. We'll turn it into some other damage. We got one final coat, a light coat of the brilliant aluminum. You can just see how much it just shines. But once this thing is dried, then we're going to continue on with the liquid latex. All right, for this next part, there's a lot of different ways that you can do it. I've seen people use toothpaste. I've seen them use mustard, Vaseline, all kinds of other mediums. But the one thing that I've kind of stuck to, because in my opinion, it's the best, because it cleans up a lot easier and you don't introduce an oil to the surface that you're going to then be painting later. I've heard some people use mayonnaise. That's terrible. Anyway, I use fine line liquid latex. Kind of. I bought this bottle about 6 years ago, and I thought it was the coolest thing because it has this needle applicator. If I can unscrew the right cap here. It's got a needle applicator so you can get fine details for scratches, and it leaves less of a rounded look. Some people will buy a masking latex and apply it with a paintbrush. In my opinion, when they do that, more times than not, it tends to kind of glob on in a rounded fashion, which scratches aren't really round. They're a sharp edge or come to a sharp point. These needle applicators allow you to get that technique to a sharp scratch a lot easier than trying to monkey with it with a paintbrush or Q-tips or however anyone else has done it. But that's literally what this is for. That's what it's made for. It's a great product. I think that this bottle with the masking latex fluid inside of it was like $8 on Amazon. But here's the cool part. I used this once. I bought this once. And then that Halloween, the day after Halloween, I went into a Spirit Halloween store and bought an entire jug of it for $1. Normally $10. It was the day after Halloween. It's the exact same stuff. It works the same way. And I've been filling this bottle up from that for years. Just shake it every now and then. You may have to clean out the tip of this. But masking latex fluid, in my opinion, has been the best solution for masking off areas for battle damage on any prop or helmet or armor piece that I've done. I'm a huge fan of latex over the other mediums. And if anyone wants to say, oh, well, I have toothpaste, it's really cheap. This was $1. I've been doing it for 6 years. It's half full. So a little bit goes a really long way. And in the grand scheme of things, if you bought this at full price, it's $9 or $10. This was $8. This lasted a long time too. So masking latex fluid is how we're going to go on for the next steps. All right. So a couple days have passed. This is fully cured. As you can see, all of those coats really paid off, and it's nice and shiny. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply our fine line, and the first thing we're going to put it on are the physical scratches that we've already dug into the piece. Now, try to make sure that your hands are clean for this part because the oils in your skin will deposit on the paint and can cause issues down the road. I'm gonna pause the video because I don't really have the capabilities of shooting this while I'm doing it. So Be back as soon as I get the stuff on. So we're going to wait until this little bit of latex that has pooled in the divot to dry. Once it's dry, then we'll move on to the other portions. But as you can see, I make the latex outline just slightly bigger than the divot itself. The paint wouldn't chip only on the part where the damage is. It's going to flake off a little bit around the damage. I did the same thing on this crack over here. And as you can see with that needle applicator, you can get really sharp points as opposed to rounded edges like you can with a Q-tip, or I've seen some people do it with a paintbrush, and I don't know what kind of paintbrush they're using, but it just leaves big old rounded edges. So we're going to come back when this is dried, and we'll start applying it all around the edges, and in this damaged spot over here where it would normally rub. That's one thing I do when I do weathering, is I think about where are the rub points? Where is this going to contact with this? Since this is a shoulder bell, the back corner of it's probably going to rub on the back of the pilot's seat, right? So there'll be some damage back there. The front leading edge is going to be, if he's brushing into things, so there'll be some leading scratches on that front edge. Your damage, in my opinion, should always tell a story. You should be able to look at the damage and go, oh, that makes sense how that got there. Or I can imagine how that got there based on how the damage looks. If it's just random and chaotic and makes no sense, it won't look like it belongs there. And it'll just give it an inauthentic look. Anyway, back when this is cured. Now the latex is fully dried. We're going to take our first base coat of a slightly dark yellow and just, again, make sure it's spraying actually paint, not just propellant. About 10 to 12 inches away. Start your spray outside the project, pull it through the project to one continuous motion, and just light dustings. And we're going to do probably 3 or 4 coats with a light dusting. Come back around and make sure to get the edges. And it's okay that it doesn't give a full coverage on that first coat. Like I said, it's just a light dusting. And we'll do probably 3 more of these. And now that that's on there, you can actually kind of see the latex, where our damage is going to be. And don't mind little gloops here and there. We'll get it all cleaned up. Back in a few more coats. So here we are, 3 light coats later. We have a nice uniform coverage of the first color layer. I'm going to give this overnight to fully cure, and then we will peel off the latex, revealing the brilliant aluminum underneath. And then once all of the latex has been removed, we're actually going to reapply it in the exact same footprint it was before, and then a little bit more. So when we paint the final color at the end, we'll reveal not only the brilliant aluminum, but this color, which is underneath the final color. Shoulder barrel is completely cured. Took an extra couple days just due to the humidity that we've had because it's been pouring nonstop up here in Washington. Go figure, right? But we've peeled all of the latex off in the areas that we want, and it's not too much. There's a little bit of damage, but again, we didn't overdo it. Painted both sides of the piece. That way it's a finished piece of armor. Peeled all the latex, couple smudge prints here and there from my fingers. But other than that, she's pretty much done. For the acrylics, you can use anything. Literally, Apple Barrel is about as cheap as it possibly gets. You can pick this up at any big box store, Michael's, Joann's, whatever craft store you have next to you. It's cheap. It works. There's nothing wrong with it because we're not going to be doing any detail painting. It's just literally going to be dry brushing. And then you can use like Deco Art's the next step up, or even Liquitex Basics. If you want to get into the Liquitex heavy body, it's a more expensive latex paint. It has more pigment. And then any of you who have ever painted miniatures are very familiar with Citadel. I'm a huge fan of Nuln Oil as one of the first things I do with a piece of armor once I'm ready to start weathering it. And then one of my favorite colors is Lead Belcher. After I've done weathered everything, I'll actually go back up and highlight some of the silver spots with that Lead Belcher. It's just an awesome color, especially for metal. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of the acrylic paint. I don't have any paper plates on me right handy, but put a little dab on the paper towel, brush it into the brush, and then literally get most of it out of the bristles to where we're just dry brushing the paint with just minute amounts. And it just leaves a dirty film. But the first thing we're going to do, we have a little bit more physical weathering to do. This is one of my favorite things. It's just 100 grit sandpaper. And we're going to sparingly use this in a couple of key spots. Like we have a spot up here, it's kind of messed up. It's like, oh, there's something went on here. And whenever you get whenever a scratch happens on something, it won't just be in this one spot. There'll be some trailing, finer detailed stuff that a wash will settle into. So we're going to hit this a couple times in a couple different spots with just a small square of 100 grit sandpaper. And then the first thing we do is we're going to hit it with Nuln Oil. And this just gives a great dirty seep into whatever small fine creases or scratches you have. You can also do this by watering down some black paint. Just take some Liquitex or some acrylic black paint, put it in your water, mix it up good, and do a big wet coat on the entire piece, and then wipe it off. Wipe off all the excess, and then that black will seep into any fine scratches. So we're going to do that real quick and come back. So that's literally just one quick light pass with the 100 grit sandpaper, and it doesn't look, it's not that obvious when you look at it from here. You get up close, you can see, oh yeah, I guess there's something there. But we're going to rub a little bit of Nuln Oil and then wipe the excess off, and it's really going to make this pop. So as you can see, we've dabbed on some Nuln Oil. Let's see if I can do this one-handed. I'm just going to wipe the excess off here. Do this a couple times, and then we'll come back with a progress shot. So after hitting the entire piece with some Nuln Oil and wiping off the excess, we got some scratches right there. You can see how it just kind of fills it in. It makes it look like it could have been more realistic or happened in a more realistic manner. It also, if you aren't using a matte color, which this is a matte finish, it will knock down some of the gloss. If you happen to use a gloss paint. But now that the Nuln Oil is applied everywhere, it seeps down into these cracks. You can just see it just gives it just some grime deep down in there, and looks pretty darn good. Next we're going to do is we're going to do some carbon or something, a mixture between a little burnt umber, some black, and we're going to do like a little as if this would ricochet off and there's some scoring on it. So that's going to be next. And again, it's going to be the dry brush method. So here I've got my burnt sienna, raw umber or burnt umber, and then a little bit of black. I dab just a touch on the brush and then literally almost wipe most of it off to where it's relatively dry, and then just in very small amounts start and with just fan it out, and it'll smudge a little bit at a time, and it just gives you, it's like, oh, you know, that could have been, you know, whatever. Gives it a little something. We're going to dirty up around this edge here. It's close to the armpit, and I know who's going to be wearing this shoulder barrel when I'm done with it, so he isn't one who washes his kit very much. So there's going to be some like residual pit stains that have leaked up onto this right in here. So we're going to do a little bit of grime buildup using multiple colors from the yellow iron oxide, a little bit of dirt, because dirt's not all the same color. You know, there's multiple different kinds of dirt and colors to make up weathering and dry brushing techniques. So if you're just stuck in a pattern of all dirt is black or all grime is black, it's really not. Look into it. Like start researching actual pictures of like chipped chainsaws or warehouse equipment. Literally, you can learn some really cool techniques by looking at actual pictures of damaged things or machinery. Pieces of machinery are great. Fuel tanks. Oh my God, gas tanks are one of the best things to look at for chipped paint and wear and grease and grime. You can use anything for inspiration, but finding real world items that are commonly used over and over and over again will help you achieve that used look on your armor in a realistic way. Rather than just making it up off the top of your head, look at actual things and you can see how, you know, maybe this spot was worn a little bit more on this side and where gas had dripped down this portion of a piece of gas tank or whatever. It looks a little bit, you can recreate that on your armor or whatever prop or piece that you're working on. But we're going to put some grime in here, again, using that dry brush method, and come back in just a minute. All right, we're all done. We've finished our shoulder bell. It's taken us a little bit longer than I wanted it to. We had to wait for the humidity to drop down a little bit and for this thing to cure completely. The whole purpose of this video was just to show what you can do with the most basic of materials that are easily available to you, either at your local big box store, hardware store, or Amazon, whatever delivered to your door. We didn't use anything too fancy at all. We didn't use an airbrush or any kind of advanced equipment or materials. We literally used the most expensive thing I think that we used was a $6 can of spray paint. So in these basics videos, we really just want to emphasize that you can do this at home with the bare minimum of things and pull off pretty cool results. I hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you've learned something. Hope you had fun. This has been Building Basics with Gurreck Clan, and I'm Kruser. Take care.